I think people have this idea that it's easy to come out with content about the autism spectrum. And I'm here to tell you, with someone who has been doing this show in some form for 3 years now, that it's not. It's not easy to come up with content for conversations about the autism spectrum. Because eventually you run into the problem, or you run into the risk of repeating yourself, repeating a lot of the same talking points, and covering the same topics involved within autism. And another reason why I have not been on top of this as much as I used to be, aside from the fact, of course, that, life has gotten busier with the baby coming and everything, is that autism is not the thing that I am the most passionate about talking about. It is something that I'm still passionate about talking about for sure, and that's why I have an outlet for it. That's why I do a show for it. But, autism is something that I am not as passionate. It's not the thing that I'm most passionate about. I was diagnosed on the autism spectrum. My wife was diagnosed on the autism spectrum. My middle brother was diagnosed on the spectrum. And I also know a fair number of people, and have known a fair number of people in my life who got diagnosed. And I love all of them. I cherish them. I am proud of them. And I recognize the traits in them that make them autistic. And I root for all of them. I want them to be able to live the absolute best lives that they can. One of my earlier messages with this show when I first started was that I wanted people on the autism spectrum to bring them, to come to the conclusion, the right and rational conclusion, that they are capable of living pretty normal lives. It may not be, as normal as others, but it can be normal enough. And I've also just kind of learned recently that when you're talking about autism is a spectrum. There's a higher functioning end of it, and there's a lower functioning end of it, and then there's even some in between. And the problem with doing episode after episode after episode of talking about my experiences on the autism spectrum, or just talking about autism in general, is that it's really easy to, as hard as this may be to believe for some of you, it's hard to put myself in the mindset of knowing that my kind of autism is not the only kind of autism out there. That there are people on the spectrum, especially and children too, that are in so devastating of a position with their place on the autism spectrum, a place that's so debilitating that they can barely live, let alone survive. And sometimes I do feel like I ignore that in this show. I have had people point out to me that, I tend to kind of only think about the portion of the spectrum that I'm on, and that can be easy to do. Higher functioning is not the same thing as lower functioning. And I've talked to people, or I've interacted with people who were lower functioning, and I loved being with them, and I loved spending time with them. But, the sad and tragic truth is that, higher functioning people on the autism spectrum start out with a certain set of traits, or a checklist almost, a checklist of traits, things that make them autistic. And as they grow up, they can learn to work on those traits, to manage them better, to, reduce them so that they don't have nearly as huge of an impact on their lives as they had before. But when it comes to people on the severe end of the spectrum, people who just have it so much worse, people who can't even speak, I mean, the problem is that they're kind of in a place where they're stagnant. They're in a stagnant place. They will never be able to reach a point where they can live on their own and do certain things on their own. And sometimes even just understand essential things in life needed to survive. And I'm not saying that to put them down at all, to discourage those kinds of people or to discourage the people who take care of them. And I really hope and pray that, people on the severe end of the spectrum will be given something that will help them, restore some balance in their lives, to give them the ability to learn the skills that they need to live on their own, or to just live and to know where they are, at any given moment, and to think like, us. That's, it's so difficult to think that there are people out there on the autism spectrum who are not as lucky as me, and a lot of other people on the spectrum as well. I think us on the higher functioning end of the spectrum tend to kind of isolate ourselves in this camp where we think that the only autistic people out there are ones like us. So I know I'm rambling with that a bit, but that's the truth. That's, we tend to kind of separate ourselves in these camps. We tend to think of ourselves as more important than others. And that's sad. That's tragic, because there are people in severe parts of the spectrum that will never be able to do the same things that we do. And that's heartbreaking. I kind of want to diversify the way that I talk about autism on this show, because, again, I tend to talk a lot about high functioning autism, and it's fine to, it's fine to narrow it down. It's fine to narrow it down to something that I'm familiar with, something that I know a lot about, because I clearly don't know as much about severe autism as I should. And the argument can be made that I really, really should, in order for this show to grow and to expand and to reach more people. I want people on the autism spectrum to feel like they can live normal lives, as normal as they can. But then there are also the people with severe autism who can't, and that's sad. I don't really know what other word to use except sad. It's how we on the autism spectrum deal with explaining emotions. We're not very good at describing our emotions. We're not very good at describing how we feel. So we either tend to use really, really basic words like sad or mad, or sometimes we can go to extremes. My middle brother is someone who has had the tendency in the past to kind of go for extremes. And I will say, he has gotten a lot better, so much better in unpacking how he's feeling and what he's going through and what he thinks. And I'm really, really proud of him for that. The progress that he has made growing up has been spectacular, and nothing short of a miracle, honestly. But yeah, this is a show that's not easy to do. It may look easy, the way that I record these videos and edit them and put them together and try to make them watchable and try to make them digestible. And I try to make them professionally made and everything. That's, it is so much harder than it looks. And it's one of the reasons why I just kind of stopped trying to do it every week, because whenever I try to do it every single week, the projects suffer as a result. The quality the quality suffers as a result too. I do plan on releasing a new podcast episode soon, but I want to know what other people want to see me talk about when it comes to the autism spectrum. And I want to even expand, I kind of want to expand my reach a little bit, so that I'm maybe not just talking specifically about autism, but also about other life things. things that affect us day to day and, and define our lives. Autism doesn't define me. The funny thing is, I talk about autism more on this show than I even talk about in real life. When I'm on this show, I talk about autism. In real life, I talk about almost literally anything else. I'll talk about Star Wars. I'll talk about writing. I'll talk about storytelling. I'll talk about just kind of like philosophy, Christianity, a little bit of politics here and there. I don't talk about politics nearly as much as I used to because, in all honesty, talking about politics as excessively as I used to kind of destroyed me in a way. It burnt me out and kind of broke me apart. And I don't think it's worth it. I don't think obsessing over politics is worth it. That's one of the reasons why I simply don't even talk about politics on this show. And when I do, I try to tackle it from a bit of, what's the word that they use? It's not, what is it? From a bipartisan standpoint. I did a video about RFK Jr., but I don't even really talk about it from a political perspective. I talk about how what RFK Jr.'s words mean for the autism community. I did a video about Elon Musk, but only exclusively talked about whether or not he could potentially be on the autism spectrum, which, Elon confirms this in an SNL episode. So it's talking about his autism and whether or not his behavior is linked to autism somehow, or is it completely and utterly his, the decisions that he makes, which I do very firmly believe that people who are higher functioning on the autism spectrum are fully capable of making bad decisions. And just like everyone else, they need to hold themselves accountable, and other people need to hold them accountable for those bad decisions. We're not immune from making bad decisions. We're not free from being able to make bad decisions without consequences. That's a very, very firm belief that I have. So I don't know. It's a lot of rambling to kind of get to the point that I wanted to make about my time making the show. I will continue to make this show as long as I still have ideas, and even if the idea well when it comes to autism runs dry, I will find a way to rebrand the show and expand beyond it because honestly, there's a lot that I can talk about. There's so much that I would love to talk about, and I would love to talk about it with all of you. And it would be great to just kind of expand, kind of grow beyond the topic of autism, where I can weave autism into certain conversations, but I can also talk about other things that are on my mind. And I kind of want to do that. I kind of want to do a show where it's more about the things that are on my mind, having to do with, with life and, life, love, happiness, stuff like that. And, as I'm doing it, I want to be able to make someone's day, by doing it. So, for all I know, this show could just be exclusively about autism with the exception of the occasional break, like my interview with Isaac Slade. For all I know, it could continue to be about this, for years to come. Or maybe next year, I'll rebrand it and kind of start fresh. Considering that I have a kid on the way, that's going to potentially create a lot of potential for new topics having to do with, an autistic couple raising a child together. What if that child ends up with autism? What if that child ends up on a different place on the autism spectrum than we are? We have had those kinds of conversations. We've talked about that. We've wondered if that, that could potentially happen. I'm going to wrap it up here. Before I go, though, my novel, The Glass God, is available on Amazon. The link to buy the book is in the description below. You can find my book for paperback and Kindle on there. My full interview with Isaac Slade from The Fray is also in the link in the description below. There's my links to Substack, to TikTok, Spotify, and X, and Instagram. It's all there. You can follow me on social media. You can buy my book, The Glass God. And I will see you guys next week with new content. Bye, everybody. Please be sure to like and subscribe. Bye.